Good morning and good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. And welcome. Welcome to today's webinar, A Fresh Approach to Senior Nutrition Integrating Trauma-Informed Care. We have a lot of content we want to get through, so we're just going to get started and jump right in today. So a little bit about us. Some of you are probably familiar with who we are, but for those who aren't, we are Leah's Pantry. We are a California-based nonprofit with a nationwide footprint in the area of trauma-informed nutrition. And our goal is really to improve the health, the wellness, and the resilience of communities throughout the country. So really, in order to create the most impact that we can, what we do is we work in community. So we deliver trauma-informed nutrition and movement programs. You might be familiar with some of our programs already. We have Food Smarts and Around the Table and NPP and Body Connection. The list goes on, right? But we also build and evaluate and consult on a lot of curriculum programs and trainings as well. We love working with partners, and we do a lot of general capacity building. And then finally, our last big bucket is really engaging in this systems level partnership at the state, the local, and the national level too. And welcome everyone. If you want to go ahead, put your name and your location in the chat. I know that's always kind of fun to see who's in the room. I see some people doing that. Hi, Alexis. So also want to thank our fiscal sponsor, California's CalFresh Healthy Living Program, and all of our other partners who help make this possible. So today's presenters, you have me. My name is Leah Quinn. I am a senior program manager here at Leah's Pantry. I am joined by two other coworkers and staff members at Leah's Pantry. We have Jennifer Weissman. Give a little wave, Jennifer. You'll hear from her in a second. She's our registered dietitian and program specialist. And we have Ellen Garcia. Ellen is a senior program and curriculum specialist here. Now, it's always nice to know what to expect, especially when you're taking the time to sit in a webinar for an hour, right? So let's share some objectives so we all know what to expect for today. So goal one, we want to start, and I will be doing this by sharing some senior nutrition data and also talking about some expected shifts in this demographic and our older adult population in the United States. I'll pass it over to Jennifer. She'll get us started talking about nutrition considerations for older adults. And then we're really going to dive into this idea of how do social, emotional context and trauma shape dietary behaviors. And all along the way, we're going to give strategies and tips for integrating trauma-informed principles into nutrition programming. So our work is not just theoretical at Leah's Pantry when it comes to working with the older adult population. It's really built on years of frontline work. So we have developed several specialized nutrition education curriculum. We have Around the Table for older adults. You'll hear us reference this throughout the training. We run mindful movement workshops through our Body Connection series. We work in congregate meal sites, making them these kind of vibrant social hubs through Wiser Dining. And we have staff out in the community in neighborhoods like San Francisco's Hunter Point, Bayview, where they are facilitating community advisory boards so that older adults can learn and collect data and analyze that and build stories and form these really incredible action plans to drive change in their own neighborhoods. Since 2021, we've also been teaching nutrition education classes for older adults in San Francisco, and that's all been through a partnership with their Department of Disability and Aging Services too. So we have a lot of curriculum and programs that support older adults, but we do a lot of work in the community and with the community as well. Okay, so that's a little bit about who we are, but let's start shifting our focus to our topic today, which is the older adult population in the US and how we can really serve them. So I'm just going to set this stage a little bit. So let's think about this landscape of aging in America. We're living in this very interesting and historic moment of longevity. So there's currently over 57 million adults age 65 and older in the US, and that's huge. It's It's a really big number. That's bigger than most European countries. So within that group, we actually see more women than men. And our community is becoming a lot more diverse and vibrant, which is something I'll talk about more in a moment. So, of course, seniors are in every single state, right? Everywhere you can find seniors, but in certain states like Maine, Florida, West Virginia, and Vermont, they're really leading the way with the highest percentages of older residents. And I love this little trivia fact, but we actually have over 100,000 centenarians in the US currently. So that's people who are 100 or older. And that number is going to keep increasing. It's already more than double what it was about 40 years ago. But that really only tells about half the story. So when we look at kind of the daily lives of the older adults in the US, about 60% live with a partner, nearly 30% are living alone. So we're going to talk a lot about, considering social isolation and how that impacts this population. So you can really see it's a big percentage of older adults that live alone. And then finally, I was kind of surprised to find this, but just a median income of over or just under actually $30,000. So very tight budgets that are being balanced and, having to juggle rising cost of nutrition and health and just general living costs that we all feel. But older adults certainly are feeling that as well. Now, we don't want anyone to go hungry. We know that. I used to be a food banker, and so it's all about, how we want to end hunger, right? But we know that in the senior and older adult population, we have a lot of seniors who are facing food insecurity. So about 1 in 6 seniors face food insecurity. And that means not just missing a meal, but that's really lack of access to nutrition needed for a healthy life. So homebound seniors and seniors of color, older adults of color as well, we know that those barriers get even higher for them. Again, coming back to this cost of living issue, since 2020, we've all been feeling this surging costs, and it's really pushing those on a fixed income to the brink at times, right? So you'll hear us kind of dive into this idea of, well, when there's decreased appetite, when there's a diminished sense of taste and smell, perhaps oral health, chronic disease, people might be juggling these things. And you see a greater risk of malnutrition in seniors as well as food insecurity. So Jennifer is going to definitely be diving more into that shortly. Now, beyond nutrition, the health landscape for older adults, it's complicated actually. So we know that at least 93% of older adults have at least one chronic condition. Nearly 80% are juggling two or more. That's not just medical diagnoses, that really can be a barrier to independent living. So things like heart disease and diabetes and Alzheimer's, it doesn't just affect your longevity, but can really limit your ability to perform daily activities. When it becomes to behavioral health, older adults are really at risk for some of the issues that we might at times associate with younger populations, right? So anxiety, depression, substance abuse, a lot of these problems can be tied, and I think we should consider how they can be tied to this struggle of, at times, loneliness and social isolation that could be impacting folks in this older adult community. So what's expected to change, right? We have a lot of changes coming in the next decade. So I don't know if you've heard this term before, but they're actually calling it a silver tsunami, but it's really more than like a wave passing through because this is going to permanently shift our national fabric here in the United States. In 2034, so in less than a decade, older adults will outnumber children in the United States, which is just interesting, right? To think about that and how that's going to change our society. And it's not just a larger group, it's a really different group. So we're seeing this big rise in diversity. We're seeing this massive leap in education as well. So in the 60s, only 5% of seniors had a college degree. Today, it's about a third of seniors. So our clients, our older adults, they're well informed. They're looking for high quality, evidence-based health information, right? There's also this longevity gap. So people are working longer than they have before. But again, many are living alone. And so the bottom line here is like we are serving and expect to serve a population that is not just a single monolith, right? It's an educated population, it's an independent population, it's a diverse population. They require social connection as much as a meal, right? So that's kind of where our TI approach will take some interesting steps to begin. Okay, so finally, the last thing I want to say about this kind of setting the stage piece is that, a core of our approach at Leah's Pantry is this idea of understanding resilience. Resilience in later life, it's not this fixed personality trait. It's really this dynamic and multifaceted process. It's not about being tough, right? That's not the resilient mindset. It's how can someone's internal strengths interact with their external support systems. A senior's well-being and older adults' well-being is heavily influenced by social factors and environmental factors. We have to take into consideration housing stability, neighborhood safety, social connection. So when thinking about programming, a one-size approach is not going to work, but meeting the needs of this population is really going to require care and coordination and flexibility as well. So with that, I'll pass it over to Jennifer.
All right, thank you, Leah. We're going to start here by talking about some nutrition considerations and some of the needs among older adults. And as I go through these, I'm going to share some tips and strategies to help address those needs. So our bodies and our physical needs change throughout our lifespan, so it makes sense that our nutrition needs change as well. So we're going to look at some of those ways that the nutrition needs can change for older adults. And I really want to emphasize that everybody is different, every body is different, and the changes in our bodies as we age will depend on many factors. So some of those are genetic, some are due to our different health conditions, and some are due to our different life circumstances. So the changes I'm going to talk about are typical for many older adults, but definitely not for all older adults. And of course, the timing of when people experience some of these changes will also vary. So older adults generally have lower energy requirements, which can lead to reduced food intake. In addition, our bodies are less efficient at absorbing nutrients as we age, but at the same time, our vitamin and mineral needs are unchanged or even increased. And chronic disease and medications can also affect food intake and nutrient absorption. So, this lower food intake and lower nutrient absorption can lead to frailty and nutrient deficiencies. Older adults also typically experience some muscle loss with age, which leads to increased protein needs. So, the less a person eats, the more important it is to choose foods carefully to get the nutrition that our bodies need. Nutrient dense foods are rich in vitamins, minerals, fiber, healthy fats, and other nutrients that are important to our health. So, these tips from the American Heart Association for eating a nutrient dense diet apply to all ages, but can be especially important for older adults. So, we want people to eat a variety of fruits and vegetables, eat whole grains, include healthy sources of protein, mostly from plant sources, but also fish and seafood, fat-free or low-fat dairy, lean cuts of unprocessed meat and skinless poultry, and then also to include nuts and legumes. And we want to limit red meats, processed meats, saturated fats, sodium, and added sugars and alcohol. So some older adults experience a loss of smell and taste, which, as you can imagine, can lead to decreased appetite. And this can contribute to weight loss, frailty, and malnutrition. So one tip to help older adults with low appetite is to focus on adding flavor. Many people rely on salt and sugar to flavor their food, but encouraging older adults to use herbs and spices can be a great way to add extra flavor while increasing food's nutrition value, especially for people who've been told to cut back on salt for health reasons. So herbs like basil, parsley, oregano, rosemary, those can all be used fresh or dried. Most of the spices we use are dried, like cumin, chili powder, paprika, cinnamon, ginger, although ginger is also used in the fresh form. But using herbs and spices can add flavor and help decrease a reliance on salt. Spices like ginger, mint, and fennel can help stimulate the appetite and help with digestion. And herbs and spices can elevate a simple dish to something much more exciting or just totally change the flavor profile. So if you think about a vegetable stew with oregano and basil, that might have an Italian flavor, but that same dish with cumin and ginger would have more of like an Indian curry flavor. So substituting herbs and spices is a great way to adapt a dish for personal preferences. And herbs and spices also have potential health benefits in addition to reducing a reliance on salt. So many herbs and spices are thought to have antioxidant and anti-inflammatory properties. So we all know that our bodies need water and we know what it feels like to be thirsty. But many older adults start to lose that sense of thirst and can even fail to feel thirsty when they're dehydrated. So it's common to see older adults drinking less water, sometimes because of impaired physical abilities or reduced mobility or memory issues or physical conditions like swallowing disorders. And in addition, many of us grew up in homes or cultures where drinking plain water was just not a common practice. So all of this means that dehydration can be common among older adults. Also, some medications like diuretics and some common conditions like diabetes and kidney disease further increase that risk of dehydration. So, adequate hydration is important for people of all ages, but dehydration is especially dangerous for older adults, and it can lead to increased risk of falls, GI problems, kidney problems, and abnormally low or abnormally high blood pressure. So, for these reasons, some older adults may need a little encouragement to drink more water. So, we can create little rituals around it, like offering lemon water before group activities or distributing reusable water bottles. These can help. Even adding sliced fruit or herbs or simply adding ice to plain water can make it that much more palatable, especially for people who are having a hard time drinking enough. And remember that herbal teas, smoothies, soups, and natural unsweetened juices can also be really hydrating. And fresh fruits and vegetables are also good sources of water and hydration. So consider asking the older adults that you work with about the strategies they have for staying hydrated. They may have some good tips of their own. So another common issue affecting older adults and their nutrition is oral health. Chronic diseases commonly seen among older adults like diabetes, rheumatoid arthritis, cardiovascular disease, and chronic respiratory diseases can all have a negative effect on oral health. And many older adults have dental issues, including tooth decay, gum disease, and tooth extractions, which can make it difficult for them to eat crunchy or chewy foods. So for these reasons, you may see a preference for softer foods among some older adults. So whether you're teaching a cooking class, conducting a food demonstration, or planning a menu for older adults, you can consider these tips when choosing recipes. You might want to include options for softer foods for people with dental problems. So this might include cooked vegetables instead of raw vegetables, and also keeping hard and crunchy items like nuts or tortilla chips as optional additions for people who choose them. You might want to try including soups and smoothies. These work well for people with dental issues, and they also help with hydration. And it's nice to include some recipes that are flexible and can be modified. So, for example, a stir-fry dish that could include meat or a plant-based protein like tofu, or something like a frittata that could include virtually any vegetable. This recipe you see here is for cinnamon baked apples. It's from our older adults around the table curriculum. So this is a simple and quick recipe. You actually make it in the microwave. And it's a nice way to encourage whole fruits with all of their vitamins and fiber while also enjoying a sweet treat without too much added sugar. So foodborne illness is another risk for older adults. As we grow older, our immune system just doesn't work as well. It's slower to respond. We get sick more easily and our bodies take longer to heal. Also, the gastrointestinal tract holds on to food for a longer period of time as we age, which allows bacteria to grow. And the stomach may not produce enough acid, which is important in helping to reduce the number of bacteria in our intestinal tract. And many older adults experience chronic health conditions like diabetes and cancer. And all of these factors can increase a person's risk of foodborne illness. But we can practice food safety and help reduce the risk of foodborne illness in several ways. We can talk about food safety techniques when we're teaching older adults about cooking, And we can demonstrate those techniques when we do food demonstrations or group cooking. And we can also make sure that anyone cooking for older adults uses these techniques themselves. So finally, older adults may experience a variety of mobility and accessibility issues, which can make shopping and cooking more difficult. So decreased muscle strength, loss of balance, and slower reflexes among older adults contribute to an increased risk of kitchen hazards like burns, cuts, and falls. Getting in and out of a chair may become difficult, standing may become difficult. People may start using canes or walkers or wheelchairs, and older adults may have vision or hearing challenges. So none of these changes mean that older adults have to stop shopping or cooking, not at all. But they can make shopping and cooking less appealing, and it can make it more difficult for some people. But we can help maximize accessibility for older adults and really for any group in our workshops and in our meal settings. So here are a few of many tips that we include in our Working with Older Adults section of the instructor guide from the curriculum Older Adults Around the Table. So we recommend that people offer options for people to sit or stand during workshops. We want to leave space for wheelchairs and walkers and make sure that we have accessible entrances to the building and accessible bathrooms. And we always want to speak clearly, face our participants, and use printed materials and make sure the print's large enough for people to read, and then use a microphone if needed. So I've shared some tips to help address some of these nutrition needs of older adults, but I also want to share a more general strategy, which is to engage appetites with food demonstrations. So a food demonstration is an opportunity to encourage people to try a new food or a new dish. And food demos shouldn't be elaborate. So some of us may like to watch competitive cooking shows, but that's not what we're going for here. The goal here is to encourage people to try something new, and we want to build confidence and show people that they can do this themselves. So one way to do that is to pick a common, inexpensive ingredient like carrots or cabbage and demonstrate how to prepare it. You want to make your demo as interactive as possible. Ask questions, get feedback from your group as you go. Keep it conversational. And then if you can, provide samples. So again, this is a chance for people to try a new food or a new way of preparing an ingredient. And people will be much more likely to try to prepare a new dish at home if they've tasted it and liked it. A food demo is also a chance to share information about nutrition and cooking skills. And it can be really helpful to use a planning template to get ready. So we include a planning template like this in all of our curricula. So you'd start by listing the equipment and the ingredients you'll need. You can make notes of any recipe modifications, like adding leftover cooked meats or canned beans for protein, or substituting spices that you might have in your pantry for those listed in the recipe. And this is a great place to get input from your participants. Ask them what modifications they would make. So, and remember, older adults have years and years of experience of cooking and feeding themselves. Next, you can make notes of any nutrition messages you want to highlight. Is this recipe a good source of fiber? Maybe it uses whole grains or beans. Maybe this recipe is a good way to use a colorful mix of vegetables. And then finally, you can think about the culinary skills you want to demonstrate. Maybe it's knife skills, or maybe this is your chance to talk about food safety, like keeping raw meat away from other foods. I've done a lot of cooking demos, and I still find it helpful to jot down these ideas before I teach. You don't need to write a whole script, but planning the points you want to make is really helpful. So in addition to the nutrition considerations we reviewed, older adults can face significant barriers to good nutrition because of decreased access to food. And Leah mentioned some of this earlier. So I think we all are seeing rising food costs. And when coupled with the fixed incomes of most older adults, this can lead to some tough choices. So older adults can find themselves choosing between food and medication or other healthcare expenses, or they may find it difficult to pay for food along with rent and utilities. Also, many older adults rely on food assistance or other safety net services, and this landscape is constantly shifting. So people are going to have a hard time budgeting and planning for their basic needs. So one way we can address these challenges is to share tools for low-cost recipes, resources, and tips. And one tool I want to share is eatfresh.org, which is a trusty online tool for finding recipes and learning more about healthy and budget-friendly shopping, cooking, and eating. It can be used by nutrition educators, by healthcare providers, social service providers, or by the general public. So in this case, the older adults themselves. So let me show you a few things that you can find on the website. Let me just make it so you can see a little bit more here. Okay, how's that? So I want to show you a quick and easy way to search is to start up here in the tan bar in the upper right-hand corner. So you can search for health issues here. You can search for recipe ingredients. So I'm going to search for cabbage. Cabbage is in season now. It's inexpensive. People might get it at farmers markets and not know what to do with it. And I see Leah just added the website in the chat there, so you can explore it on your own. So I search for cabbage. We can see it pulls up a bunch of recipes with cabbage, so we can scroll through those. Let's take a look at this one, cabbage with carrots. So a nice thing about the way these recipes are displayed, so you'll see the ingredients here, and it says it serves 8. So if you are working with a large group, like in a cooking class or preparing for a food demo, and you might need more, you can easily double those ingredients. If you are planning to share this recipe with a group of older adults, you might want to have the ingredients or even go down to 2, because as we heard from Leah, we know many older adults are living alone or in smaller groupings. So that's a nice feature. You also can print the recipe here. So this is a way that you could share it with your group. So I'm going to go back. When we searched for cabbage, it also pulled up some lifestyle tips here. So these are tips that are relevant for cabbage. So you can see 2 tips here that have to do with the fact that green vegetables like cabbage are a good source of calcium. So maybe we click on this one, and this one talks about osteoporosis risk, which might be important, interesting, relevant for older adults. So you scroll down, it tells us a little about how to prevent osteoporosis, some foods that are high in calcium. There's a video and some additional resources, additional recipes. Okay. Another, let's see, another place we can look is this home bar on the top of the home menu on the left side. So we can look for recipes here, and we can filter recipes by meal type. So salads, soups, breakfast, like that. We can filter by cuisine as another way to find good recipes. And we can filter by cooking environment. So you might want to pick 20 minutes or less, look for some simple recipes if you don't have very much time to prepare. We can also filter by dietary information. So if you have a group of vegetarians, you could look here for vegetarian recipes. If you wanted to look for low sodium recipes, which might be a need in your group of older adults, you can search there. You can, another great thing to look at here is this tab for Cultivate a Healthy Lifestyle. So here we have all kinds of tips, shopping and budgeting, physical activity, cooking, chronic disease prevention. So a lot of helpful information here. I'm going to look at shopping and budgeting. If we scroll down, we see here, oh, buying produce in season. This might be interesting for your group. So it talks about supporting farmers markets. We have a video. We have some resources here on how to find a farmers market and some recipes. Okay, and then I wanted to show you the Discover Foods tab. So this is a way that you can look up a whole variety of different foods, not just fruits and vegetables, also beans, there's dairy, protein. So you can search in these categories, or you can type the keyword in here. So let's do cabbage again. We're going to learn all about cabbage. So this one pulls up a page on cabbage where it describes it, tells you how to buy and choose the item, and then how to store it. And this is a section that has been really helpful for a lot of people who are interested in how to store fruits and vegetables to make them last longer. This could be something really useful if you're teaching a class or doing a food demonstration and you want to learn more about the ingredient for yourself, but it's also something, again, that you could print and share with your audience. And then the last thing I want to show you is how you can use the Google Translate to translate any page on the website. So you go up to the top and there's this little globe icon. So if you click on that, we're going to select a language. Maybe we'll do Cantonese. So it translates the whole page here. You can also use the print button and print that if you want. And just a caveat, this is Google Translate, so it's not going to be perfect, but it's a good start, and we recommend that you confirm that with a native speaker if you can. Okay, so there's so much more information here. I encourage you to play around with the website yourself and see how you can use Eat Fresh to make your work easier and help the older adults that you serve. So with that, I'm going to pass the mic to Ellen.
Great. Thank you, Jennifer. So Jennifer shared some important considerations around older adult nutrition. We're going to pivot a little now and talk about the personal, interpersonal aspect and how trauma can influence some of our interactions with older adults and their behaviors around food. This is the trauma-informed part of trauma-informed nutrition. So here at Leah's Pantry, we use this term trauma-informed a lot, and it might require a little bit of definition for some of you. So let's begin by defining trauma a little bit. We talk about trauma in terms of these 3 E's: event, experience, and effect. So trauma can begin with an event or a series of events that is stressful or difficult or scary. It could be a single event like a death or a natural disaster. But it could also be something ongoing like poverty or food insecurity. Whether an event is traumatic, though, and how lasting that trauma is really depends on how the person experiences it. And that really varies based on their previous life experience, environment, genetics, social supports. So, for example, let's imagine that there's a fire in a senior housing complex and 2 residents, unharmed, are displaced. One of them is already in very good health and has a loving family that lives nearby and can provide a supportive place to stay and some replacement household items and more. But the other one does not. And they also have a medical condition requiring consistent monitoring and a daily schedule. So these 2 people are going to experience this event pretty differently, and they might have lasting different effects, right? So this is why we say that the event and the experience together results in the effect, what might be a long-term effect. And this is how we see trauma as a neurobiological response. So trauma being something that happens in our body and our nervous system, it's not just what happened, right? It's how the body, the brain, and the spirit responds to what happens, especially if we feel powerless or unsafe or unsupported. So in this example of that housing fire, we have one resident who might be able to bounce back with the help of family and material supports, but the other one has fewer supports and maybe a heightened need because of their medical condition. So the fire might be more likely to cause long-term effects on that person. They might show more stress as a result. So that's what we're talking about with effect. I do want to give a little bit more space to just what kind of events are we talking about? Again, it's not the event itself that's traumatic, it's how a person experiences it and the effect that it has. But there's a lot of events that that could become traumatic. What you see here is a little more focused on experiences that could happen generally over a lifetime. It's not specific to seniors, right? At the household or the personal individual level, there could be a lack of food security. There could be mental illness of somebody in the household, alcoholism, abuse, right? But also we think of the individual or the household sort of in this individual microcosm as needing all kinds of support from the community, the way a tree needs nutrients from the soil, right? Coming through its roots. So we go down into the soil, we look at the good roots so that it can grow, and we start to pull in community effects. And this is where we might see challenges or events that are potentially traumatic, like a lack of jobs, like poverty or violence or structural racism. And then we can even think more broadly in the much more general environment, right? represented by a tornado here, we might think of things like wildfires, earthquakes, something like COVID-19, where people are forced to shelter in place for long periods. That could be traumatic too, right? So we can imagine that for a person who experiences any one of these events or challenges in isolation by itself, with appropriate support, there might not be a lasting effect, or it might be so subtle that it doesn't show up. But for someone without support or someone who is experiencing many of these at one time, the effect could really be overwhelming. We also want to keep in mind there are certain kinds of traumatic events and experiences that we're just a lot more likely to see among older adults because they've lived a long time, right? They may have been through a lot of things in their long lives. So, at the personal or household level, we see seniors are more likely to have experienced grief and loss. Of course, the death of a close family member or partner, but also the cumulative effect of outliving many loved ones can be really depressing for some people. They're more likely to have experienced a medical crisis in life. And as both Leah and Jennifer have pointed to, isolation is a huge issue for seniors. At the level of community and society, many older adults have had to move great distance in life, sometimes forcibly through displacement. They might have lived through historical periods where discrimination was pervasive or even sanctioned by the government where they lived, and they might have firsthand experience of war. And then at the environmental level, we just know that whatever is going on in the environment, seniors are extremely vulnerable to these kinds of crises, right? Looking at food trauma specifically, we also know that there are seniors among us who've either had specific experiences of hunger in their lives, they could have had a general ongoing issue with food insecurity at some point in their lives, if not now. Some of the seniors among us have experienced famine. It's a little hard to imagine in the United States what that's like, but this is a historical reality that many of the seniors among us are really familiar with. Um, it could have even been at the hands of the government where they grew up. This certainly happened in the 20th century in parts of Asia and the former Soviet Union, where the government really was responsible for people not having enough food. And so traumatic food related experiences can happen at all three levels here. And it's also important to keep in mind that sometimes older adults might not consider these events as traumatic or reflect on how these events or experiences affected them because it was not something they were raised to think or talk about. Uh, they might have felt better off than other people around them, right? And therefore very invested in that experience not having been a big deal. Maybe it was common in their community, but it could still be affecting them in some subtle ways that show up in our settings. But again, remember how someone experiences an event and its lasting effect is related to what we call resilience and resilience factors, which is not just being strong, right? Not having problems, not being affected by anything. It's what we're talking about today is not the absence of struggle, it's the ability to adapt to a struggle. So going back to my example of a building fire that displaced two residents, we would expect both of those people to be upset during the fire and to need help immediately after. That's human. That would happen to anybody. But one of them has a lot of tools in their toolkit to bounce back in the long run. And the other one's probably going to need more help. And this is why we say resilience is the process of the body and mind adapting well in the face of adversity, trauma, tragedy, threats, or significant sources of stress. Because the reality is that being alive means we're going to experience stressful and bad things. Resilience is how we cope, right? On one hand, we're shaped by these adverse experiences, but on the other hand, we can be shaped by positive experiences too. That's the flip side. These can play a crucial role in our well-being, our ability to thrive, and research that was conducted by the Hope Center at Tufts University shows that individuals who can identify a wide range of positive experiences in their lives, this is having positive experiences, but also being able to identify them, recognizing them as positive, even with varying degree of adverse experiences, those folks live longer than ones who don't have and can't identify as many positive experiences. So people with more positive experiences who can identify them live longer than those who don't have as many, which should be encouraging for us, right? Because as we said, there's going to be adverse events in our lives, but how we build on those positive experiences and bounce back and help other people bounce back is through these resilience factors. These are just the tools in our toolkit that we can control to some degree, not perfectly, but we can work on them, like having resources, certainly material resources, access to nourishment, community connections, feeling connected to the fabric of people around you, having positive relationships, education and sharing of knowledge, and simply just the feeling of agency or control over your life. All of these are resilience factors that can help a person bounce back after a tough experience. So hopefully by now, our concept of trauma-informed practices and what we're talking about with trauma makes a little bit more sense. It's encompassing a holistic approach to food and nutrition and security, acknowledging the impact of trauma and toxic stress, and also integrating strategies to support individual and community resilience. We're simply accepting that people's behavior and motivations are influenced by past experience, and these might be complex. And we don't need to know all the details of an individual's prior experience to support their resilience. That's really important. We're never going to know everything that somebody's been through or that they're thinking. But we can accept that someone's experiences and motivations are legitimate, even if we don't know what they are. And we can support their nourishment, their sense of control over life, their positive experiences, and more. So this brings us to a strategy which can be helpful in strengthening our focus on resilience, and that's reframing. In other words, just flipping the script, looking at something in a new way. We can reframe problems for ourselves, but we can also help others to reframe. So I'm kind of talking about both of these things here. The first step is in any challenging situation or interaction is just to remember there's possibly things below the surface that we don't know about. In fact, there's definitely things below the surface we don't know about. We see somebody's reaction to a situation. That's the effect in those 3 E's. We see the effect maybe, but we're not seeing the experiences and the events underlying that reaction. Some of them might be traumatic. So are unstated preferences and cultural norms as well that are not traumatic, but we don't necessarily know what those are. We'll talk about that more in a minute. So let's take an example of reframing. What am I talking about here? So here I've listed some negative stereotypes or biases around older adults. You might not have any of these, or maybe you've thought one of these words in a stressful moment interacting with somebody. These words that are not always complimentary or positive, feeling cheap or thrifty. You know, people are moving slow or they're fragile. An older person's picky or stubborn or just old sometimes has a negative connotation, unfortunately, for some people. I'll give an example of just one of these. So perhaps you know an elder who's not supposed to have sweet drinks for some reason. They have diabetes, right? And their doctor said they can't have sweet drinks of any kind, but they love orange juice. It's literally their favorite thing. They're going to take it at mealtime, no matter what the doctor says, no matter what you say, they want it. And our immediate reaction to this might be that it's stubbornness. Oh, so stubborn. And then we have a negative feeling about that because they're not doing what we want, right? We don't think it's rational. But we can reframe this. Let's just think about this in terms of resilience a little bit. Could this be a manifestation of somebody really understanding what's important to them? Maybe this person knows exactly what makes them happy. Orange juice really is their happiness in life. And they think it's worth the health risk. They understand and they think it's worth it. suddenly they're showing resilience in a sort of interesting way, sort of an unexpected way. And we don't need to be in opposition to them anymore because we can recognize that self-awareness is positive. We can admire it, even if we're still going to encourage that person to drink plain water, right? But we're reframing to let go of what might be our own negative bias in favor of more of a resilience mindset. We can also reframe behaviors we encounter in programming too, not just our own thoughts, right? But behaviors that we see at a food pantry, for example. So just one of these, I'll take the first behavior, food hoarding. We do see this sometimes. This is just somebody taking more food than we think they need for their physical needs. So we might look at an elder at a food pantry and think, why are they taking so many bananas? There's no way they can eat all those bananas before they go bad. We offer bananas every week. Our immediate reaction might be that this is not rational, right? But if we reframe it, we can see something else. Perhaps this person experienced hunger, extreme hunger during the Great Depression. Perhaps they have diabetes that is not well controlled and they're afraid of having a blood sugar emergency, like last week when they had to go to the emergency room, right? We can start to imagine that there is some possible logic to this behavior. Note, of course, we don't want to spend too much time speculating or making up a story about what's happening with a specific person and then we get attached to that story. It's not really who they are, right? That's not the point. The point is that we want to remember that behavior that doesn't make sense to us in one setting might have been completely legitimate in another, or made complete sense or been a great adaptation in another, actually been a sign of resilience in another. And so we can keep this in mind to support our empathy, right? As opposed to arguing with the person or dismissing them or dismissing their thinking. And this shifts our question away from, why is this person taking so many bananas, to something more like, does it matter if they take a lot of bananas? And that's a very different question. We could do a similar reframing with any of these scenarios, and it might not change what the elder is actually doing, right? But it might help us to feel a little more empathetic and allow for a more positive interaction. And hopefully we find that by using this understanding of trauma to reframe some of these interactions and things we see, we can meet them from that place of empathy. I do want to point out there's a lot of great activities out there you can do with staff in your organization to build empathy with each other, with clients and participants. We use one at Leah's Pantry called empathy mapping, and I'll include a link to the instructions for that and a handout for the activity in our follow-up to this webinar if you want to check it out. This brings me to a specific tip, which is sharing meal times. A lot of you folks are doing this already. Sharing food is one of humans' most basic activities, but a lot of older adults in our community don't get a chance to share meal times. If we were to ask them what meal times were like for them growing up, we'd probably hear all kinds of rituals and experiences that help shaped their lives in beautiful ways, right? And yet today they're eating alone a lot of the time. So mealtimes are an important opportunity to not just provide a lot of people at once with nutritious food, but to give them the opportunity to practice caring for one another, talking, passing food, taking turns, cleaning up. It's true for kids, it's true for us, it's true for everybody, right? All of this leads to an increased sense of well-being and connectedness, those resilience factors we talk about. And even if your work doesn't involve organized meals for seniors, where they have some choice of foods and can sit and talk to each other, you can still take any activity that involves eating and add little rituals to it, social interaction, to get those benefits. Of course, we want to keep in mind that different cultures have different food traditions, especially around manners. So what's very polite in one culture might be seen as rude in another. For example, some cultures consider it rude to leave food on the table, like the cook's feelings will be hurt if there's leftovers. But then in other cultures, it's rude to take the last serving of something because, a family member could show up at any time and need something to eat. So both of those things can be true and fair. And we're never going to know all the details of every culture's norms around food or the manners people expect. And we have to be careful, like I said before, making too many assumptions about somebody, especially based only on their cultural heritage, right? But we can keep this diversity in mind when we see a behavior or interaction we don't understand, or when we're getting frustrated in an interaction or situation, that someone might simply be operating with a different set of norms than our own. This brings me to another tip, which is, whoops, excuse me, simply opportunities to contribute. We all want to feel useful, but sometimes we need the opportunity. So America's social safety net would not be what it is without senior volunteers. I think they're the great unsung, unpaid labor force of the United States. So many of our food pantries, meal programs, community spaces really rely on the unpaid efforts of seniors, and in part because serving others can be so empowering and therapeutic. But even outside of these formal volunteer settings, we can always make space for older adults to contribute to our events in small ways, passing out cups, calling friends to remind them of the event. If we offer a food demo, like Jennifer was talking about, we can ask for an assistant to show how to cut the onion. They might actually know better than we do how to do it. And engage them with decision making, like what new dishes to try or demo. And of course, some folks want to, but we can always invite. And sometimes this is all we need to do to redirect somebody who's maybe wanting attention or just control over something in their day. And our final strategy for today is a really simple one, which a lot of you are already doing, keeping the conversation going with older adults. It's simple, it's not rocket science, communicating with love and care. Of course, it shows that we're open to forming a bond. It shows someone that they're seen. But it's easy to forget when we're busy, when we're crowded with people, the environment is chaotic, and especially if we're afraid of being misunderstood or we have not historically spoken to somebody, maybe because of a language difference, a hearing issue that they have, or a cognitive issue. We get used to not interacting much. That person keeps to themselves. But we can still try, right? So if you're actively doing this, congratulations. You are building resilience. It's that simple. One simple way that you can try or practice, if you haven't already, is just being deliberate with acknowledgments and affirmation. Really simple stuff. Consider that older adults, especially people who live alone, may get little or no affirmation in their day. So simply saying, hey, thank you, remembering their name, small details such as a favorite food, can really reinforce somebody's sense of connectedness. And this is not limited to older adults. Of course, we can do it with coworkers, do it with kids in our lives. Everybody needs this, right? We all want to know what we're doing well, what's appreciated. It gives us a sense of purpose and tells us what to keep doing. It's reinforcing. And fortunately, using body language can often work when words don't. So we want to extend that same warmth to people, whether they speak the same language or not. We are certain they can understand us or not. We can still extend that warmth through body language, right? You say hello with the smile, the tone of voice. Your message will still get through. Someone will know that you're open to them, you're warm to them, even if they don't know exactly what you're saying. And, just very, very simple greetings, acknowledgments, and affirmations can go a long way for somebody who doesn't have a lot of other contact in their day. And finally, when you have a little more time, you can consider activities where older adults can share about their pasts, traditions, and wisdom. So at Leah's Pantry, we often include a discussion of our food histories in community workshops, asking questions like, who first taught you about food and cooking? And what does comfort food mean to you? And all of a sudden we'll see somebody perk up who's never spoken before. And it's really inspiring. So we've even created a specific feature of our older adults curriculum called Our Wisdom Traditions, where we explore the health promoting traditions from different cultures and ask seniors to reflect on their own. And that way they can learn from each other, which is probably better and more valuable than anything we could teach them. So even if you don't have time for full activities like this, just keep in mind simply asking questions when you get the chance. What tricks do you use cooking and shopping for one? What's your favorite holiday meal? Creating this kind of space for conversation can really help older adults share ideas, build bonds with each other, and this is a great step to supporting their resilience at mealtime and beyond. So with that, I'm going to pass it back to Leah.
Thank you, Ellen. So we're in our closing, but don't leave just yet. We have a couple minutes and some fun things to share. So of course, we will be sharing a recording of today's webinar with an email that has a lot of additional resources. A lot of the things that Ellen and Jennifer shared today, as well as other resources will be in there. And we really hope you enjoyed today's session. We would love to offer more webinars like these in the future. So with that being said, your feedback is so important to us. So we have a QR code on the screen. I'm also going to have our handy tech support, Carrie, drop it in the chat as well. Melissa says our org has, Otter site. Oh, Melissa, don't worry. That is not from someone within Leah's Pantry. That was just an attendee who was using Otter. So we'll have slides, recording, all that shared in a follow-up email, and you should be able to get everything you need there. Yes, please fill out our feedback survey. And then let me just review a couple of the upcoming things we have and some of the resources we covered. So Jennifer showed you eatfresh.org. We'll have the link in there in our follow-up email. Again, Eat Fresh is your one-stop shop for food, recipes, health information, storage best practices. You can translate it, and there's also the mini course on there if folks want to take advantage of a free nutrition education online learning series. We talked about Around the Table for Older Adults. This is a nutrition and cooking literacy curriculum designed really embedded with TI principles, trauma-informed principles for adults ages 65 and older. So it includes 6 lessons. Each are 90 minutes long. They're designed to be delivered as a series, and the topics include things like mindful movement and recipes and nutrition and cross-cultural health exploration and discussion. So it's a really great series. It's our newest kind of iteration of Around the Table. We're very excited about it. It's been really well received. As you can see, the workbook is beautiful, it's colorful, it's fun. So those who are interested, know that we have a training coming up. I'll cover just a few of our trainings and then we'll be closing out. So we have 3 trainings that I think would be most interesting to those who are in this room who work with older adults. The first up is Wiser Dining. This is an intervention for congregate meal sites. So our goal with this program is really to move beyond this idea of just like serving food to really creating this positive, exciting, joyful experience for guests. So you get trained how to do a needs assessment, you get tons of resources, you get support from Leah's Pantry. You can graduate your site through this program. It's offered asynchronously, so you can always take that training. We also have Older Adults Around the Table, which I shared about recently in the last slide. So this is really about that positive and adverse experiences and the relationship with nourishment. The training itself is a hybrid of self-paced work and live sessions, and you get access to the full curriculum bundle. You become an instructor. You're able to take this incredible curriculum out to your own community. And then body connection. So we actually do have a great curriculum around movement. We know that good nutrition works best when paired with a regulated nervous system, right? It's very complementary. So it's a series of 6 mindful movement lessons, very accessible for all mobility levels. That's really important to us with body connection. So you learn how to teach body literacy, breathing techniques, sensory awareness, really connecting older adults with movement and tying that to nourishment. So if you're interested in anything we have to offer, we have a really great deal for you, which is that you can use the code Older Adults Webinar for 10% off of any of those trainings. So I will include that information again in the follow-up email. With most of our trainings, Justine, if you're not able to make a live session, there is a recording that you can watch, but you can always reach out directly to a team member if you have any questions about that or can't make a specific date. So that's it. We're at the end. If you want to stay in touch with us and connect with us directly, we have info@leaspantry.org, which is a really great kind of catch-all email. So please do reach out to us. And otherwise, I'll just leave you with saying thank you for coming. Thank you for attending. Our timing is impeccable. We're an hour, we're 60 minutes on the dot and we ended. So I really appreciate everyone's time, and we look forward to working with you all more in the future. Thanks, everyone. Getting a lot of great feedback, and we'll be sure to kind of look through the chat box in case there's any follow-up questions we need to reach out.